Hi, I'm Danny Ramos, and welcome to this week's edition of Hispanic Speak Out TV, brought to you every single week on Bright House Cable, every Tuesday night at 9:30 p.m. Here's the place where you learn about politics and meet politicians and community leaders that are changing lives in the Central Florida community. Before we get to this week's guest, I want to introduce you to this booklet. This book can be found in 170 7-Eleven stores throughout Central Florida in the 5-county area. And this booklet is absolutely free. Pick up this booklet and it will give you information on how to hire an attorney, information about bankruptcy, foreclosure, and a lot more. So before you hire a lawyer, pick up this book. It's free at any 7-Eleven store. Now for our guest. Tonight we have Darren Soto, who is a state representative, Florida House State Representative, and Darren is running for State Senate in District 14. Darren is a long-time advocate of rights, civil rights, and the poor, as well as respecting the rights of the middle class. Hi, Darren. How are you?
Hey, Danny. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, you know, we always like to have you, and you're very informative. What are you running for, and who are you running against?
I'm running for State Senate, District 14, which is East Orlando, Kissimmee, Point Siena, and Haines City, parts in between. And I'm running against a Republican named William McBride.
Okay, and you don't have anybody to run against?
There is no
primary?
Primary.
So it's a head-on fight between Republicans and Democrats?
It is indeed.
Okay, what do you think about Romney having money in foreign banks?
I think he needs to invest in America.
That's what I've been saying, you know? And, you know, I keep on telling Glenda that, and Glenda, yeah, okay, that, you know, I used to be a very Republican until I really started to look at some of the stats. When did the housing collapse actually happen? That started to happen way back in 2005 and 6, and it actually started to fall in 2007.
Right. And there are everybody's hands in that collapse. You had everyone from the Republican Congress that loosened up the rules so that your average savings bank can now invest in investments, including these complicated mortgages that ended up collapsing. You have Bill Clinton, who was the president at the time, so he had to sign it into law. So we're not totally exculpable on that. You also have the stock market that was ever willing to fuel money more and more into it. You have mortgage brokers and real estate agents who are looking for the next dollar after the next dollar, and appraisers, and you saw those houses go up and up and up. And you even had homeowners and future buyers who said, I may earn $30,000 a year, but I deserve a $500,000 house. All that spelled the recipe for disaster that essentially collapsed our economy. And we've been struggling for the past 5 or so years, pretty much right after I got in office, to recuperate from this.
Okay, Clinton?
Yeah, and actually, interestingly enough, which in my opinion started a lot of the things that are happening in our court systems today, even on a state level. For an example, we know the terminology now being called as robo-signing because of these unfortunate business practices, as we want to say, maybe securitizing these mortgages and turning into what they were. My question is, and what I need to understand, I guess, is how robo-signing on a state level is accepted. I mean, these judges know that these are fraudulent documents being presented to the courts. It's very frustrating to sit back and watch these families lose these homes based on the fact that it's been exposed that this is called robo-signing and that these documents are being brought to the court, but the judges are not acknowledging that.
Well, first of all, to answer your question directly, it's unacceptable, and no court should be accepting fraudulent documents. One thing that I was able to do in 2012 and in 2010 was stop the non-judicial foreclosure bill from taking hold, which would have denied people even the right to get to the court. So think of how many problems with fraudulent documents we have already, even with judges. Can you imagine non-judicial foreclosure where you got 30 days notice of default and then 60 days later you'd be out from the house if you couldn't settle? What has happened on the federal level, that was what this huge lawsuit, 50-state lawsuit was about, was to deal with this. For folks who did lose their houses, they'll get $3,000, $4,000 under the rationale that most, if not all, these banks actually had the paperwork. They just fudged it to speed it along. But those banks who use fraudulent paperwork that actually didn't own the loan, they're going to suffer far greater consequences. The only positive out of it is that we ended up getting a substantial amount of money, billions, back into our over 13 billion to be precise, that'll come back to Florida in the form of helping people out with the reinstatements and going into the hardest hit fund, which is currently about 600 million, almost 700 millions left, in order to deal with homeowners who are in foreclosure. It used to be a program that dealt with just people who were unemployed for 6 months, and we didn't get a lot of success with that. So now they're changing it where up to 25,000 may be paid if you got your job back, and that's going to get you back on your feet. So I'm hoping, although it never works as fast as you want, that we'll see some folks coming, being able to reinstate their loans and stay in their houses.
But in the meantime, this is the most frustrating thing for me being on this side of it, is watching, for an example, judges, again, let's go back to that, where they know the knowledge of this, the plaintiff's attorneys know that the documents that are being presented in court are fraudulent, and then they go ahead and set a sale date. They don't even let the defendant's attorney speak and say, well, this is what the situation is. And my understanding, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, we are going to see a very strong acceleration of foreclosures in the next 60 to 90 days, simply because some of this money that's being funneled to help even the court systems to process these foreclosures and get them off the dockets. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with that. That is some talk that that's happening. And I kind of see it happening, where the judges are not granting the time. First,
as I said before, it is unacceptable to accept fraudulent documents. Having done a lot of this work in my firm, foreclosure defense work for hundreds of folks, I can tell you, if you really have an argument like that, you want to bring a court reporter, because without a record, a judge knows on appeal you're done. And so that's one of the first things. If you're a foreclosure defense attorney and you know you have a good, strong fraudulent argument, you go in with a court reporter, and then the judge knows if they deny that they're going to have a permanent blemish on their record in the form of an overturnment in an appeal. Another big issue to understand is that don't go it alone, because a lot of the judges have frustration with it. As far as the funding, I do know exactly about that because I sit on the Justice Appropriations Committee, and while I have fought to make sure we don't have any change in the law with regard to homesteaders for foreclosure, and it ended up that the whole bill got toppled, and so no substantial property rights have changed in foreclosure for anybody, regardless of whether it's homestead or not. I have been a big advocate for getting funding for the courts so we have enough judges to hear these cases. That's not to speed up the process, that's to make sure we could have judges on the bench to do so. We brought back about $3 million for the state, which was a lot less than the $10 million we got back in 2010. And in 2011 there was no money because of the robo-signing scandal. Things came to a halt. But I'm very cognizant of the fact that there's been an uptick, even in my practice. A bill that I've put forward for 3 years in a row is the Foreclosure Bill of Rights. It would require the banks to settle at the actual market value for the house, and then they would get a lien for the difference, but you could only go after that if the house is sold in the future. We're also seeing this same strategy now 3 years later used by banks and called a shared asset management plan, or otherwise known as SAM. And basically they'll knock down your principal, but if you sell your house one day, if there's an increase, then they get a piece of that increase. Right. Which I think, while it's not great, it's still a better deal because you're paying for the life of the loan a smaller principal. That bill has not even been given the light of day in the legislature, and that's
So why do you think that is the case? I mean, I want to believe that we want to do what's right by everybody, and I have seen that banks, they stand to make a lot of money off these properties, and it's through insurance companies, private insurance. I mean, it's all there. It's all public. What is it in the bank's best interest to really work with a homeowner at this point?
Well, there's only certain regulations that require them to. Under the HAMP program, the Home Affordability Modification Program, if you qualify under the regs, they have to qualify you. And that has to be done within 1 year of the last payment. But if you have one document missing, and usually they'll review it 2 or 3 months down the line, and if you haven't updated your file, which is the thing that catches a lot of people, then They're not going to, because they're only going to do it because they're forced to, because they accepted bailout money, and as a result, they got these regulations. The only other thing is that it can be a costly venture keeping these houses after the sale. A lot of the banks buy them in foreclosure. A lot of times you'll see it's bought for $100. That's because the bank could bid up to the judgment, and so unless you think the house is worth a lot, you're not going to bid against the banks, and so no one bids against them and they get it, but they still are owed that money. At the end, it's a timing thing. A lot of these houses have dropped so much that in certain cases they don't want them. What I'm seeing a little bit of daylight on is the smaller banks are selling them off to other banks who have bought them at a reduced rate, and so they're able to do a little bit with principal. But you'll almost never get a principal reduction from the major banks, including Bank of America and Chase, as well.
Well, the program that they implemented, sorry to interrupt you, but with Bank of America, for an example, that came out with doing a principal reduction. First of all, you had to be delinquent January 31st of this year in order to qualify for this program. And of course, your Fannie Mae's and Freddie Mac's and all the other ones don't qualify for the principal reduction, which now they own, I believe, between 80 or 85% of the bad paper. They've picked it up. So you've really segregated. You've kind of put a very small percentage of people to even get this principal reduction.
Well, and I wasn't even referring to that program. That program's a joke. We all know that. I'm not here to
This is why I love him.
That's why
this is why I love this guy.
I don't even recommend it to. I don't even mention declines because I've not had one person ever qualify. You know, there's a couple basic deals you do if you're faced with it. Short sale's a good deal if you're way below. If you're below 50% of value or you got money, try to short sell it. If you are close and you think you're going to get reemployed and it hasn't dropped that much, maybe try to modify. And in the end, you're talking about bankruptcy is your ultimate hammer if nothing else works. And a lot of people are having to go that route. We've had over 500,000 families in foreclosure and rising, and that figure is going to look very similar to the bankruptcy rate in this state because that's the only last resort that you have.
Well, couldn't there have been an easier solution?
There could have. If they would have passed my bill 2 or 3 years ago, it would have reduced the mortgages to the actual market rates. And so your classic house in Buenaventura Lakes, which is in the district that should be about 120 to 160, that jumped up to 260, would have gone down. And I think you would have seen a lot more people continue to pay their mortgages or be able to afford their mortgages, not have to go into foreclosure. Correct. And it's a vicious circle. Because the more people that go into foreclosure, the more the houses go down. But my peers would not agree with me on this. They felt like you sign it on the dotted line and that's about it. And we can't adjust that at all. And I said that may be true, but you're continuing the collapse. You are contributing to the collapse by encouraging more people to do strategic defaults. And then as the houses go down, more people default, and it goes down and down and down. Finally, now one of the only saving graces that we have is that the houses are so low now, and rent is getting to such a point that we now have huge investment funds coming in and buying in bulk. There was just an article in the Sentinel the other day about an Alaskan oil company fund that is bringing in $400 million to buy up hundreds of houses in Central Florida. We've had a Rent for You. I think that's the name of the company that's coming and bought hundreds of houses.
And what are they going to do with all these houses?
What they said in the newspapers, they're going to rent them for 5 years and then sell them as the market recuperates. So cash is king right now. If you have money, now is a great time to buy. But it's unfortunate that it had to be that way rather than keeping these families in their homes, lowering their principal in the short run. You penalize them with an early sale with having to pay back through the lien, the rest. So you encourage them to stay in their home, you lower their payments, and when the market recovers, which would have recovered quicker, then at the time that these houses go back up, then it's worth it for them to pay off that lien, and the bank gets their money, the homeowner got a smaller payment in the short run, and there was no welching of this debt, this moral hazard everybody's so afraid about. So that would have been a great idea. A lot of people pushed for it early on, but it's just not the climate in the legislature. Very Republican dominated, and contract is a contract is a contract. Doesn't matter if we're all going to jump off the cliff in a real estate market.
Doesn't matter that the banks instructed these families to go delinquent in the very beginning.
And more importantly, they got our money. Just so everybody knows, they got our money. They got bailout money in the billions, and then they in turn shored up their assets, and the taxpayers got their money back. But where was the bailout for the homeowner? And that's one thing that I've always been sort of frustrated about for the feds and on the local level is that there was never a bailout of Main Street. And I don't mean give everybody $25,000 or $30,000 or $100,000, but what should have been done on the state level was pass this bill, and what it should have been done on the federal level is Fannie and Freddie Mac loans waive down the principals to at least something close to what the actual market value is. And that's actually something that happened under the savings and loans scandal back when Reagan was in office. They actually did that. But nowadays, you know, we have just such a Tea Party extreme that's pulled everything further to just, you know, the debt is the debt, and this is what we do. And
so we have increase of criminal activity, that crime rate's going up, suicides are going up. We've got more children homeless than we've ever had before.
And so
it's a vicious cycle.
So the only thing I can tell you is I have tried. I put forward that bill every year, and there's a new bill that I put forward this year and that I hope to put forward in the future, which will waive deficiency judgments for 5 years. So you have all these people who won't have to declare bankruptcy anymore, because if it's a homestead property and you owe a debt, gone, or at least lower it down to 6 months. So if they don't go after you, we're seeing increasingly banks now going after people for the debt because they're selling it to some third-party debt collector for pennies on the dollar. And think of that margin.
Yeah.
You buy for 10%. If they collect 20% on a $200,000 debt, which is not too big of a mortgage debt when you look at the houses around here, there is still hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to be made, and people, from the moment of the sale, you have 5 years to establish the debt, and then you have 20 years to collect if you establish the debt. So unless you were foreclosed as in this house sold back in 2007, this date, you still can be on the hook for that debt, and they'll wait till the last minute.
That's right.
You'll get that knock on the door, the phone call at the house. Hey, Danny, you still owe us $200,000, almost in the clear, but now we want our money.
Well, you know what? Then I'm going to go move to the Caymans with Romney.
With his $300 million.
With his $300 million.
Stashed.
You better hope they don't have a treaty with us where they can respect our judgments.
I just sleep on the beach. You know, I'm at a point, where, no address.
So a couple other things that we're looking forward in the future. Obviously, I'm running for the state senate now, which is 3 times the size of my current House district. There's a couple education reforms I'm looking to put forward. One is potentially requiring school uniforms across the state with an opt-out by school boards, because it doesn't seem like they have the courage to do it right now, other than in Osceola, where we've seen a reduction of about 25–30% of violence in the school. Another thing that is actually a page from the president's address, State of the Union, was raising the dropout age to 18. We allow these kids to drop out at 16. They use it against their parents, and they're not even allowed to even enroll in the military. They're not even allowed to vote, yet they have this big decision they can make. And a third thing is I think we need to do a truancy rates, because right now we don't have a statewide policy on it. Kids can be absent 30, 40, 50 days. We're testing our teachers on their AVCAT scores, and yet they can bomb because they're never in class. Another big thing which is a big money project that I'd like to see, and it will take a couple of years to bring home to the district, is to bring out an international runway and an international terminal for Orlando International Airport. I think that would be a huge boon to our region. They're still waiting for us to get to, I believe, 50 million passengers. We're getting close to it, but we need to start preparing for this. Right now, most international passengers have to take a flight from some other hub over to here, and we need the additional space for Homeland Security to be able to process these folks. You look at the per capita, the highest spenders are Brazilians. And now I know the president is working on both China and Brazil and some of the other countries speeding up the process, but we're still going to need folks here. So those are a couple of things we're working on. We need to see Sunrail through, and we need to keep Visit Florida's boost of money up that they got, an additional $40 million up. We need the Hispanic plate to still stay around, so that you guys can do the job fairs. And I'm committing to you today that I'm planning on putting up a bill to extend the time for you all to qualify.
Well, we appreciate that. You know what our problem was, Darren? The big problem is that you get organizations like the Orlando Magic or the Miami Dolphins. They have millions of dollars that they take from their profit-making organization, which is the teams, to support the activities of their nonprofit, which is their plate. So they have tons of money to advertise the plate. Now, we are a small Hispanic organization, and in the law it says that we can't use any money, revenues from the plate, to advertise the plate. So virtually we have no money to let the people out there know that this plate exists. So right now it's word of mouth and Facebook. That's where it is. Our friend over here on Facebook.
It might work. Facebook's pretty awesome, but
well, I can tell you.
You know, so that's the problem we're having. But you know what? We got an idea for a promotion that may work, and we're launching it tomorrow, and I'll let you know about that.
Great. Well, as you can tell, I'm certainly open-minded to it. I want to see how it would work across the board with everybody and what the line of reasoning was for that rule. But I think either way, I'm wholly committed to extending the time. As you know, it was the only plate ever passed where we didn't have to show the full numbers in each county because we were able to make the argument that Hispanics aren't in each county, and so it would be discriminatory and block us from doing it. And the Hispanic Caucus obviously rallied behind you on that. A couple other Hispanic issues we're working on right now. Obviously, thank God we were able to stop the Arizona law last year. That was something that I had about 10 to 15 amendments sitting, waiting in the House.
What do you think of this thing that they're talking about now in Florida? To limit, to go over all of the voter rolls, to eliminate people. That's a big thing. It's been on TV all the time. So they want to cut down the voter rolls.
Well, you know how I said two things?
Give us the
that was
background
the
on
other
that.
thing. So
Okay.
thanks for stealing that. That has over 53% of the 180,000 Floridians who are on that list are Hispanic. And I've been working with the Hispanic Caucus because we are a bipartisan group. We have legislators predominantly from South Florida who are Cuban Republicans. Yo soy el único boricua y demócrata. But it's been a slow push because this thing has overtones of partisanship, and so there's been a tough push on it. Obviously now it's in the court. The federal government and the state of Florida are suing each other now over this voter purge. And I think the thing that the voters need to understand is timing is everything. This is done on purpose to make sure you don't vote. And you should be outraged. And we're seeing people who are outraged.
But their game is to say that there are illegal aliens on the voter rolls that are voting, that there are dead people on the rolls.
6 people out of this 180,000, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, have been determined to be illegal at this
And
point.
what about dead people?
And those, as in unlawful altogether, dead people or otherwise, 6 people they found out of 180,000 people.
Wow.
One of them, who is included on that list of 180,000 people, is a 91-year-old World War II decorated veteran who's lived in this country his whole life. What it's based upon is an old data file, and they know that. And now there's a fight between the feds, and there is one valid argument that the state government has, which is they want the updated list. The problem is they're asking for these now when it's already illegal to purge the rolls. So it's a great argument. Why didn't you make it about 60 to 80 days ago when it was still legal to do this? They didn't, and now they want to hang their hat on it. But the key is, even if they got that, it is illegal. You cannot do it. 60 days before the election, you cannot change the voter rolls. Why? For obvious reasons. You're stacking the deck or taking the deck away. And so the key is...
So you're saying that this is all Republican orchestrated?
I think it's all Rick Scott orchestrated. I don't think all the Republicans are on board with it. Some of them are very concerned. You got Supervisor of Elections, Mike Ortell in Seminole County, in a staunch Republican area, a Republican supervisor of elections, who said from the beginning there's no voter fraud problem and there's no issue. And it goes along with this strategy to reduce the vote because there was huge turnouts in 2008, and they didn't like what happened. They didn't like it. And so you saw this anti-voter act in 2011 where they shortened early voting hours in half from 2 weeks to 1 week. Why? Because Democrats vote then. What did they not touch? Absentee ballots. Why? Because Republicans vote using absentee ballots. What they also tried to mess up was registration. Instead of 2 weeks, they made it 3 days to turn in a registration and increase penalties from a misdemeanor to a felony to get at such sinister groups as the League of Women Voters and the Boy Scouts. It was absurd, and the federal court smacked them down the other day, saying that that part was unconstitutional. Another thing that's going to affect the Hispanic community that we need to understand is changes of address. Right now, it's virtually invisible, the county line between Orange and Osceola with regard to how people live. If you're living in South Chase and you move to Buenaventura Lakes, you're not thinking much about any major changes. You have to change your address, and you have to change it before the election. From what I understand, it's 60 days, but I have to double check. It could be 30 days. Point is, if you change your address since the last election, you need to change it with your supervisor of elections. And all of it is there to play these gotcha games, to lower the vote, so that we can have another low turnout election like in 2010, which they liked. And the sad truth is that they could have had it done if it wasn't for the federal court, if it wasn't for the federal government stepping in, and thank God.
Your turn?
That's fair fight. No, I mean, that's just crazy. I just learned a whole lot. All I know, I can speak on behalf of you. I actually contacted Darren. I got very angry about something that was happening in Seminole County over foreclosures. And I will say, out of all the representatives that I personally sat and emailed, I only had 2 that responded back to me, and he happened to be one of them.
Who was the other one?
I can't remember. All I knew is I just knew that he was from my area, so that mattered a lot to me.
Darren has always been extremely sensitive to the grassroots of his community.
Yeah.
You know,
and I think that's very important.
You know, I've run into a lot of politicians. You know, a perfect example is Congressman Daniel Weber. He was here, vote for me several times, and then after he got elected, he wouldn't even answer a letter that we sent him, you know? Wow. And that was at the congressional level, you know what I mean? So,
bit of a lesson I could give anybody who wants to run for office. Politics is 9/10 presence. You have to be around. You have to answer emails. You got to go to HOAs. You got to go to town hall meetings.
Well, you've always done that. You've always believed in knocking on doors and meeting people.
Well, you have to. I mean, don't you have to experience it one-on-one? I mean,
it's a rite of passage. Yeah. It's hard to do. Every door you have to walk up with your 2 shoes and impress another person, as opposed to sitting on your couch spending millions of dollars and looking at yourself on TV in something so scripted. But I think if you're willing to put in the hard work, you can. You need money to get on TV. You need money for mailers, obviously, and you need money for radio and things like that. But also the hard work definitely pays off, and it's irreplaceable. And that's something that we've always done. We've always tried to outwork our opponents, be out there. I go out every time. It's weekend after July 4th until the election. We're walking doors, and we hit thousands and thousands of them. And I've just been blessed to have a lot of people walk door to door with me. And, you know, in all fairness, we target the folks who vote. It's not every house. It's the folks who we know are going to the polls. We want to make sure you know our message. And our message is pretty simple. First and foremost, we still have to resolve this foreclosure crisis. Equally as important, we need to fund education. There was a $1.3 billion cut to education in 2011, record in history. Record cut, $1.3 billion, which is disgraceful. Wow. We saw $300 million in cuts to the university system this year, also despicable. And the whole thing is, it's all a matter of priorities. You can get some dollars from various different things like transportation, economic development, all important things, and healthcare. Education, it takes a longer time for return, so it takes vision to protect it. But one of the biggest problems we have in our state is we don't cultivate as many entrepreneurs as other states our size, like New York, California, Michigan. States like that have a lot more entrepreneurs. What we try to do is bring them in with economic incentives, and to a certain extent that's worked in that Lake Nona is rising out of the fields and it's helping out.
Darren, I got to cut you off because we had a great interview. We run out of time.
Okay.
We need another one.
Well, hey,
we need another interview.
I know my stuff, and I want everybody to know that. So.
This is
thanks for having me,
Danny Ramos, and welcome to Hispanic Speak Out next week. And thank you, Darren. This is the guy to vote for. He's community-based, community-sensitive. And thank you, Glenda.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.